different styles, and
Yes.
obviously they were influenced by it. So, when were you first exposed to Sublime? You said when you were on the beat.
Yeah, you know what? I was a music writer for the L.A. Times. I was living in Southern California, but I'm a Northern California granola-loving hippie chick, too, as well, so I kind of had both. I grew up in NorCal, listening to a lot of soul. I used to work at a soul club when I was like 11, so I was always exposed to music. And I had friends who were working with Sublime, and my sister used to hang out with that crew because they were her friends from Santa Cruz, and they were managing Sublime or, working in A&R, and so they were on my radar, and most of the time when I would try to go to a show, they wouldn't show up, which wasn't uncommon. A lot of people didn't get to see them, but I did. I think it was Board Aid up in Big Bear. You know, if you caught one great Sublime show, you were super, super lucky. And those who did catch them are the people that you really want to talk to, because like I interviewed the singer of the Vandals in the book that I did, and he was there for the really freaking epic shows, which is why he has so much love in his heart for Sublime. And a lot of times the experiences of Sublime fans have come through the eyes of people who were there. And someone like Dave Quackenbush was there, and he is easy to reach via Vandal's website. And if you're a real Sublime geek, talk to Dave. He knows a lot. So we were running in the same circles. I was friends with John Phillips, who managed them, and Blake, who actually discovered them. And but just like with Tupac, who I also wrote a book with, the bodyguard of Tupac Shakur, I got to know him mostly posthumously, and that's the same with Brad. I got to know his mom, his dad, his stepmom, his sister, people who were close to him, and that's basically what I know about Bradley, but we didn't have a personal friendship like I do with a lot of other people who were coming up at that time. So.
And everybody knows about his on-stage presence. I mean, obviously he had an amazing voice. Obviously, a lot of the shows were alcohol-fueled, had a crazy improv style, but let's talk a little bit about the man off stage. What was he like? What did his friends and family say about him? How did he treat them?
I'm so honored to give you the different perspectives, because like with everything, nothing's a pure play, so people have different relationships with the same person and see things different ways. But I feel like I have a pretty comprehensive view of that, because I did talk to his wife and his ex-girlfriend and his mom, and they all had something to contribute. But what I love is just that he was so literate in music and didn't have any boundaries. And when it came to music, would be singing a Whitney Houston song down the street like his, ex-girlfriend Kat Rodriguez would describe. And he just loved music. So he did not care if it was Whitney Houston or if it was, Barrington Levy, or if it was somebody, that happened to have a popular hit at the time. He just was one of those sponges who would take it all in, but because he was a pure artist with that pure heart and soul, much the same way that I think of as the first Hank Williams. First Hank Williams had a voice and a style that was so unique unto him, and that's what Bradley had. He could rob from the hood, take all this stuff, internalize it through his personal experience of growing up, kind of a surf rat in, the Long Beach area, always kind of migrating, despite being from the good side of the tracks, migrating toward the bad, because he kind of had an artist's view of life. And, what a great honor and privilege we are to have his music. I mean, he gave us this gift and this legacy that said, I'm an artist, I'm here for a limited piece of time, but I'm going to tell you how I see the world. And we have this legacy that helps us celebrate and, have a good and accurate accounting of that time in history. And honestly, because I have a rap background and a punk background, I so appreciate him being at the crossroads of that, I'm so grateful to him for opening us up to the music of the islands, celebrating rap, KRS-One, celebrating punk rock from the Southern California of the Falling Idols and Bad Religion, but also being enough of a Santa Cruz granola-eating hippie to cover a Grateful Dead song. Like, God bless you, Bradley, you gave us that. I wish we had you longer, that's all.
Yeah, he was so musically talented, he could go from covering the Bad Religion song to then covering Grateful Dead, and it just sounded so beautiful.
Yes, and it sounded so beautiful. Why? Because he had that Hank Williams voice. And why did he have all that musical talent? Because as a kid, he sat around playing guitar with his grandpa and his dad and anybody else who could pick up an instrument. And if there's anything that anybody gains from this podcast, it's pick up a fucking instrument, sit around a campfire or on your couch and play, because you don't know what's going to come out. And, that's the gift that I think his dad really gave us, along with supporting his son and, always trying to keep him out of trouble as much as possible. His dad gave him multiple gifts. His dad gave him that gift of inspiring the music, and I think that was a family thing, but his dad also gave him the gift of travel and world experience. So you have this artistic, sensitive kid who's a real brainiac and very literate, being exposed to music during his travels and of the islands, and he absorbs all that and brings it back, and that's kind of epic, so pick up a guitar and travel, even if you have to join the Peace Corps to do it, because that will help you, especially if you want to create music, obviously, that would help you internalize the world,
Yeah, and not only that, Brad he was an incredibly intelligent guy. I remember someone recalled a story, preparing for his European tour, that he just was reading books on European history. So not only pick up a guitar, but pick up a book too, because obviously he found that just as important.
Yes, and how exciting would it be if we were able to have him still be here telling us, dropping more knowledge on us. That's the great tragedy, and I think that, again, we have to not look back and say, I wish we had more. We just have to be grateful for what we do have and really appreciate what we do have. But all is not lost, because I do not know if you have heard any of his son's music, but his son is next generation.
Yeah, he's in a band called L.A.W. Haven't you been working with him also?
Yes, I have, and that's why I'm trumping him up so much, because he and I have a book project together that we're embarking on that I'm very excited about, because, again, being able to chronicle next generation, that's an honor for me as a historian. I feel like I'm sort of a punk and rap historian. I wrote, and certainly just grab this, I know there's lots of gardeners. I wrote the first book of rap with Ice-T, The Ice Opinion, and that was kind of the 1992 uprising led to, basically, Ice-T is a rapper who's more known as being an actor, but he was a real revolutionary voice for his time, and I got to write that book, and it's so fun for me to now be able to write or to edit with Brad's son, because he is so smart, so literate, has his nose in a book more often than not, and I hear much of this from his Aunt Kelly. Brad's sister is a really dear friend of mine. But I've seen his poetry, and I've seen his writing, and that's kind of what we're going to put together as an anthology of Jacob Knowles' work. He's also gotten to travel and have those experiences through Papa Knowles, his grandfather. And I'm really excited about the music, because as a music lover, you hear Sublime with everything that means, but you hear the hard edges of our times, which are harder than even Brad's times 25 years ago. The world continues to change, and that's, great music will always evolve with the times, and that's why I love Jake's music, because it's an evolution.
What is he talking about? A lot of the same things that Bradley talked about. He talked about. Some of the issues that he talked about we're still dealing with today. Legalization of marijuana, police brutality, addiction. What are some of the things that his son Jacob's writing about?
Well, his son Jake is so much smarter than me that like I literally am gonna have to bone up on my own reading. He's into like sci-fi. Like my daughter likes Ray Bradbury. I think Ray Bradbury is probably a good touchstone for Jake. And so it's like a whole other level stuff. You know, it's literally like I have to do my own research before I'm even able to edit anything that he writes because it's so intergalactic sci-fi stuff. And I think that's really cool because that's one of his big passions. And the poetry, thoughtful, insightful. You know, I mean, I have a number of friends who became super famous in music who have children, and sometimes those children, you know, have a difficult time because they're always going to be compared to the success story that is their parent. And what's great about being able to work with Jake is the fact that, you know, I don't think he's going to have to go through those insecurities of not wondering, you know, is my work good enough and all of that. I mean, it's dope. It's great. It's great. So he doesn't have to worry about the comparisons because he's kind of his own man doing his own thing, but clearly with the blessing of the brilliance of his father, you know.
Yeah, I heard him. There's a couple of YouTube clips of him. One just doing an acoustic cover of a Sublime song, and then on stage, and his voice, it sounds extremely similar to him. Does it not?
Yeah. Well, what's so nice is that I mean, for me, imagine the courage it must take.
I can't even imagine.
To be the son of Brad Nowell and to be doing music.
I can't even imagine.
I mean,
it's a big shadow that we're walking into.
Yeah. I can't even tell you how much courage that would take, you know? And so I'm just so happy that he's doing it. And again, I draw comparisons from the Hank Williams tribe just because I feel like Brad's purity is as pure as Hank Williams Sr., the original. And Junior did it, and then Hank 3 came around. And I'd like to see that kind of legacy with the Knowles. I'd like to see that. I'm sure there's other music and artists. I haven't even talked to Kelly about her kids. I'd like to kind of keep seeing that dynasty because that's, you know, that's really cool. I mean, when you go see a Van Halen show and you see, you know, Eddie's son playing bass, or when you go see a Brian Wilson Beach Boys show and you see Mike Love's kid come up, or not Mike Love's kid, who's the shaggy-haired, God, there's a important Beach Boy whose son, I think he might be a cousin, I'm trying to think, or he might be an original member, but his son is now singing with the band, and his son has an incredible voice. So, you know, you want to stick with family traditions, you know? Let's just keep everybody putting out that good stuff.
What about the rest of his family? How are they doing? I know you're in touch with his sister, Kelly.
Yes, well, Kelly, I like to refer to her as the goddess, and the reason I do that is that Kelly...
I'm sure she doesn't mind that, being referred...
What's that?
I'm sure she doesn't mind being referred to as a goddess, so...
Well, she is such a humble person that, you know, she'd probably be, like, so embarrassed. But the fact is that, as a writer, you can't really judge your own stuff once you're done with it, and so I have Kelly as my copy editor on all my books, reluctantly, because most of my stuff is independent and she's severely underpaid, but she actually doesn't do it reluctantly. She loves it. And, oh my God, she just made a book of mine that was going through so much turmoil. I just wrote a book with the first wife of Ice-T, Darlene Ortiz. She was on all of his album covers, the Power album and stuff. So if you look back and you type in Darlene Ortiz, you'll see she was kind of like the Farrah Fawcett of the hip-hop generation. She has a very famous picture of her on Ice-T's Power album with the gun. Anyway, I did a book with her, did it off to Kelly. Kelly cleaned it up. There were so many problems in the graphics thing where things kept reformatting weird. And she is just an angel straight from heaven. So Kelly's doing well. You know, she's just incredible. She's as smart as her brother in different ways. And she's really the one that I keep in contact with. And then I'm just super happy that I'm working with the estate again because I really want to do a book as great as the book that I did with Brad's dad and Chris Gallipoli, the art director. You know, Crazy Fool was an interesting project and how it all came about. I can tell you some of the cool, you know, things behind that. But, you know, I look at that as like, I think it's my favorite book of all the books I've done, and I really feel like Jake's book's going to have some of that moxie in it, you know.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the book. Well, it's the first ever biography of Sublime's Bradley Nowell, and it's called Crazy Fool, Portrait of a Punk. Obviously, Bradley had an impact on you, even though you got to know him more posthumously. Is there a particular story
like
that...
everybody, once I got, 40 ounces of freedom, I didn't stop listening to it for 18 months.
Of course. It was always in the cycle.
Yeah.
Is there a particular story from the book that's kind of like always sticks with you, that is almost a microcosm of life with Bradley, or even Bradley's life?
Well, I can tell you that my friend Eric Stein from MCA Records called me to say Brad's dad was interested in doing a book, and I jumped on it right away because I was very interested in knowing the story. And because, again, I knew him, I knew all the same people. I had already a foot in the door of that world. And so when Papa Noel and I got together, I was so excited. And we worked together a great thing, sent it to New York. And New York, like I said, was like, oh, fuck you. You're L.A. Fuck you. And I said, well, fuck you, New York, because guess what? We're going to do this book ourselves. And I went to Brad's dad and I said, his fans deserve this. And he said, sure, let's do it. So we did it ourselves, DIY'd it. Among my favorite stories is I was about to meet an art director to figure out how I wanted this book to look. And I knew I had to make the book look as visually stunning as the music is visually interesting and intriguing. And I knew it had to be for a post-literate generation, because not everybody can read. It doesn't mean they're dumb. It just means they have trouble getting through a lot of words. So I wanted it to look as great as the music sounds. And tap, tap, tap on my door came a postal worker who brought me a package, and in that package was a book about the first guitarist of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Hillel Slovak, called Behind the Sun.
He died of
Next knock at the door was an art director showing up to meet me about the book, and I'm flipping through the Behind the Sun book going, I want it to look like this, I want it to look like this. Like, all of a sudden I was like, wait, I have a good idea here. And I got to a page in the Behind the Sun book while I was interviewing the other art director, and I saw a smelly tube sock in the lower corner of the picture. I'm like, I got to get this art director of the Chili Peppers book. And I did, and his name is Chris Gallipoli, and we've been making each other crazy ever since, because we've done multiple projects together, and he's a genius. And that's why the Sublime book looks the way it does, and also I had the freedom to write it the way I did. I wanted it to be something that his fans would really appreciate in the intimacy of it and how close they could get to him through this book. And the last thing I'll say about Crazy Fool is that Brad's allies and friends they're a tribe. You're either from Long Beach in that tribe or you're not. I don't care who you know. It's like a lot of coastal cities. The South Bay is that way. And as a writer, I was an LA Times writer, I penetrated a lot of tribes. They let me in as an honorary member. But, it was difficult extracting the stories from the people closest to Brad. And at one point, during the book project, I literally looked up to the skies and said, look, Brad, you either give me a sign you want me to stay in this game, or I'm tapped out. Because I can't keep trying to chase people to, give me interviews that I think are worthy. Well, the very next day I was in Palm Springs at a Katie Lane concert, I kid you not, and a woman comes up to me and said, I heard you're writing a book about Sublime and I wanted to give you something. She gave me a 40 ounces to freedom bottle that he had given her when she was helping him do PR for 40 ounces to freedom. And she thought I should have it. And I literally looked at the heavens, I go, there's my sign, I'm in. And from that moment on, every door opened, everybody gave me interviews, and we ended up with a great project. And so it's a very indie project. We printed up a limited edition, and people bootleg it, but truthfully, you either have it or you don't. And if you have to spend $300 to get it, great, 'cause it's going to be worth $1,000. It probably already sells for $1,000.
I just noticed on Amazon that it was selling for about $300. I was hoping you could maybe tell us a place where we can find it for a little bit cheaper. But since it is a one edition style, of course, I would imagine that's pretty difficult.
really, at some point, we'd love to have the budget and the ability to do another version of it, and I'd love to include things that we couldn't get in there. But it's a big undertaking. This is kind of the difference between doing an indie bootleg thing with a lot of people just saying, "Here's my shit. It's cool. We love it." If you do a major publishing effort, it gets super, super, convoluted, and I don't know that it would be as pure, But somebody else is going to, pick up a pen and paper and do another book, and there's going to be more books written by, friends of his, and I look forward to all of them because, I'm flipping through the book right now, and I'm literally looking at a page where Brad had dashed off an essay when he was at Santa Cruz, and you could tell, this is Long Beach, CSU Long Beach. You can tell he probably just wrote it right off the top of his head, but it's all about questioning authority, and it's so fucking genius. It's like he's saying question authority is more than a bumper sticker because he had a conversation with a guy who was a Holocaust survivor, Like, how do you even connect those dots? You know what I mean?
You named the book Crazy Fool, and of course, for those who know Sublime, that's a name of one of his songs. Now, and the lyrics don't really seem actually about him himself, but obviously you ended up calling the book Crazy Fool. Why do you think? Why do you pick that name and that song?
That question. No, I'm so happy because I'm so grateful to be able to address these things. Dave Quackenbush from the Vandals is one of my muses, just as a person and a human being. I love Dave. You have conversations with him. You don't know what's going to come out of his mouth. And I interviewed him for the Brad book because I was tipped off that he made it to a lot of shows and that he really knew them and really loved them. And Dave's a hard ass. I mean, I've known Dave for years, and he hazes me for the first 10 years of being friends with him, and then he's sweet as pudding pie. But he's a classic, first-class punk. Well, he agreed to do an interview with me, which meant a lot to me because, again, I was still meeting tribal resistance, And he said when he first walked in and saw Brad on stage, he's like, "Who is this crazy fool? I love him, And immediately I was like, crazy fool, crazy fool, crazy fool. I love that. And all the stories that started accumulating over time, there was what I call divine madness. A lot of artists and actors and writers and directors and people who I love passionately have divine madness. They're crazy. They're crazy, but they're brilliant. Bradley had divine madness. My favorite actor from the 30s, John Barrymore, had divine madness. There's Van Gogh, whoever it is, they have this thing. And so I thought, crazy fool, because once I got Miguel's acoustic record, I couldn't stop listening to it. That song, Crazy Fool, would just come out and come out and come out at me, and I just was like, wow. And so Dave Quackenbush, as my muse, inadvertently gave me the title for the book. And as an aside, he did the exact same thing for the Warped Tour book. I wrote a book with Kevin Lyman and his family about the band's Warped Tour. And so I interviewed Dave Quackenbush because the Vandals have been on the Warped Tour a million times. And for those who don't know, Dave is a singer of the Vandals. I think he was also in Falling Idols, and he's really amazing person and poet himself. And I was interviewing Dave about Kevin Lyman, and he said, and I quote, "He has a psychotic ambition." So I called this Warped Tour book Tales of Freedom and Psychotic Ambition, and that came from Dave Quackenbush's poetic noodle as well. So, but yeah.
Let's talk a little bit more about the music itself.
Yeah.
Now, the name Sublime, do you know why they picked the name Sublime? Or just because of the definition, beautiful and all that?
Oh, I'm sure I do know why they picked the name Sublime, but I'm sure I forgot it a long time ago. those are among the files I delete on a regular basis, but I'm sure if I flipped through the book, I would come up with it. I know that Brad did pick it. I know he liked the word. I don't remember the origins, but I'm sure there's a great story behind it. And if I were you, I would beg, borrow, and steal to get Miguel to do an interview, because Miguel is the brain trust. He knows everything, and hopefully one day he'll share all of it. I know at the time I was doing the Crazy Fool book, he was still in too much pain, because that was his, best mate. So But Todd Dawkins, Z-Man, that's another person to ask on some of the specific things from back in the day. But yeah, as far as the music goes, you know, I was madly in love with Sublime. Like everybody else, picked up 40 Ounces to Freedom and never stopped listening to it. So inventive, so cool, and especially if you are a SoCal or a lover of SoCal music, you hear the Beach Boys, you hear the Chili Peppers, Bad Religion, you know, Falling Idols, all this great shit. He was an equal opportunity thief, you know, took from everybody but made it his own, and that's the key to artistic thievery. You don't just take a Bad Religion song and play it like Bad Religion or a Falling Idols song or a Grateful Dead song. You make it your own, and Brad was so amazing at that. But it wasn't until I went to Jamaica after writing Sublime's book that I realized how much Robin of the Hood he did from the music of the island. I was bowled over at how much of an impact the great reggae artists like Toots and the Maytals had. And so it was fun because I kind of learned it backwards. But I recommend anybody who's a Sublime fan to go out and get a Toots and the Maytals best of if they have it and discover some of Brad's cues.
I couldn't. Of course, I mean they were one of the original ska reggae bands out there. And of course, I think
Right.
I think Sublime. Don't they? I think on 40 Ounces of Freedom they cover Toots and Maytals song. If I'm correct, I could be wrong on that.
Right.
Yes.
They do variations of it. Yeah, they do, and it's funny because again, and it was kind of another one of those cosmic weirdo things that happened. But I went to Jamaica for a writers and a writer and music festival. It was an amazing thing, and I went. There's no power in the room. So there's nothing to do, and I went to get a CD because I had like probably a Walkman or something, who knows. And it said it was Bob Marley's greatest hits. And I'm like, oh, cool. I'll go just listen to Bob Marley's greatest hits. It was mislabeled. It was actually Toots and the Maytals. And I was there to do a reading from the Sublime book, and I'm listening to Toots and the Maytals for the very first time in my life, thinking I already knew them. Holy shit. It was like bringing ghosts back from the dead. It was like having, even though Toots is still happening, you could hear the music from just something about Toots is music for the ages that just goes back in time, just kind of like Brad does. And literally, there I am listening to that, going, "Holy shit, Brad! You put everything in the pot, like literally and figuratively."
You know he wasn't scared to take a little bit of this, a dab of this, a dash of that, a smidge of that. In that sense, he was fearless, and to even throwing in some hip hop, that's almost like a quintessential Californian thing to do. You Californians, you guys, you love your gangster rap, and you love your ska and your punk and your surf rock. It's such an interesting juxtaposition.
We're unapologetic about it. I was a young lass during the West Coast East Coast wars, and I was a rap writer for the L.A. Times, and only because I wrote Ice-T's book, not because I knew anything, but I learned quickly because I grew up working at a soul club from 11 to 16. I was a ticket runner to go see all the free shows at a venue owned by Sammy Davis Jr. He was one of the owners. So for me, it was kind of like I figured it out quickly, but we always had to defend ourselves here on the left coast to New York, and I'm bitter about New York simply because as a purveyor and narrator of West Coast stories, we were always treated like the redheaded stepchild, the bastard city of the great New York. Well, my feeling is that pound for pound, music for music, we are every bit as great out here on every level and can go toe-to-toe with anything that ever came out of New York ever. And maybe because I'm from California, I feel that way, but not really. Because punk rock, what stands the test of time, so much of California's music, not to discount New York, but they will always, always, always skew everything toward New York in the arts. But in fact, here in L.A., we do our own shit, and we do it really well. And, Ice-T, N.W.A., Ice Cube, Dr. Dre, Tupac Shakur. I Can Stop Now. I'm sure there's a lot of young artists today that are every bit as good as what's coming off the East Coast. And I'm not saying I don't love me a Tribe Called Quest or KRS-One or Run DMC. I love all that shit.
But don't forget Biggie. Don't forget Biggie
What's
now.
That?
I said don't forget Biggie now, of course.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, I can't even engage in that because I'm a Tupac loyalist.
You know you're talking to a New Yorker right now, so of course.
Yes,
but that's the great thing.
Yes. And I'm serving it up to you, New Yorker. But I'm telling you, you're a New Yorker showing love to the West Coast,
and that's what I'm saying. That's
that love because. We need love from New Yorkers because we're always defending ourselves. And why I love the fact that you are a New Yorker, that you're a New Yorker who gets the legacy of Sublime without looking down on it.
Well, that's the great thing about music.
That's being open-minded.
Well, that's the great thing about music. I mean, that's people who are on opposite ends and probably don't have a similar way of life in many different ways, many different things. They can come together over these musical beats, and of course, just to let you know, I'm such a big fan of California that now you're going to be absorbing me. The Mind's Eye is moving to Los Angeles in about 3 weeks or so.
Oh my God! Wait a minute! You yourself are moving to the great city of angels from New York.
To Studio City. And
I am welcoming you to Los Angeles because we need you New Yorkers to go back telling our stories. We need you to help us be put in that perspective that that the artists here, the writers here, and the artists here, and the actors here, and everybody here should be as respected as those from New York. And so...
Oh, perfect. Well, I might have to have you as my tour guide as well. And
we'll take you to see Gospel Beach at the Echo and Charlie Overby. There's a lot of really good Americana roots rock, like Neil Young-y type stuff right now, Bruce Springsteen type stuff. There's some really good shit on the streets right now. So, and really what's also very exciting about Los Angeles is that our art scene is popping right now. Street art is popping. It's popping.
Awesome. Well, that's what I'm moving there. I'm moving there for the street art, the music, and the tacos. Mainly the tacos, but the street art is and the music is a nice extra bonus.
Yes. There's absolutely no shortage of excellent tacos, and if you're living in Studio City, you can start with Henry's Tacos right there. So you're in good shape.
Yeah, it's so good that when I was visiting there a few weeks ago, I went into a Chevron and there was a taco stand in there, and it was one of the best tacos I've probably ever had. So that pretty much sums it.
Entrepreneurial spirit of the Southlander, because when your job as a mortgage broker didn't work out, you got to start doing the hot dog carts in the Arco parking lot. I've literally met people doing the exact same thing. They're just trying to feed their kids,
And that almost kind of sums up the spirit of Sublime. They were do-it-themselvers. When they couldn't get signed to a major label, they decided, hey, we're going to start our own label and distribute our own thing.
Yes.
And that's the spirit.
Life won't wait. Imagine if we had waited around for a major label to get Bradley Nowell. We wouldn't have had Robin Hood. We wouldn't have had 40 Ounces of Freedom. We wouldn't have had all the other groovy stuff that we have. And so, yes, that's exactly right. If there's one thing that we learned from punk rock, it's life won't wait. You got to just make it happen.
Yeah, you got to grab life by the throat, and that's the punk spirit. And
so yeah.
Let's keep talking about musical part and their legacy a little bit. Artists, for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, they become eligible 25 years after their first album. 40 Ounces to Freedom came out in 92. So next year, technically, they're going to be eligible for the Hall of Fame. Do you think that they're actually going to make it?
I think as the generation coming up that grew up with him posthumously, I think as they continue to gain power, yes, of course, Sublime will have its part in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, because by then they will have spawned so many Sublime bands and the children of Sublime, and so that will have become a genre in and of itself, and that's no small feat, creating your own genre, so I'd sure like to see that. I'm just happy that the book is at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame at the Hard Rock Hotel in Las Vegas. I don't think Brad would have cared if he had any award or anything like that. I think, again, he's just lover of music and wanted to express himself musically, that he, I'm sure, I know this, is just stoked that people like it, you know? That's it. That lyric he says, you know, if I had $1 million, well, I'd spend it all. It's like, you know, I just think that's just how, I think that's kind of what he gave us. It's just like, live it, do it, have a great time, you know, try not to hurt anybody along the way.
I don't think I agree with you. I don't think that they're going to get in right away, but I feel like I compare them to an old school baseball player who you probably didn't appreciate as much. You get a better appreciation for them as the years pass by and get in kind of much later on in their career, so to speak. So I think they'll get in eventually. Do you think the fact that...
you know, the music is undeniable, and the fact of the matter is that, again, I don't know if you ever saw the Behind the Music where they interviewed me, and I said, you know, people might not realize that he's, you know, Jim Morrison or Kurt Cobain now, but they will. And I truly believe that's already happening, because the truth is that Jim Morrison's freaking awesome. I love the Doors. Yeah, his poetry wasn't always great, you know, so, okay, whatever. I love him, not aligning him, but whatever. I don't like to grade artists on an average, so I'm not going to grade him on an average, but truthfully, I'd rather listen to Sublime most days, you know, given the opportunity. There's no doubt about the relevance and importance of Kurt Cobain. There's no doubt about that. I don't want to listen to Nirvana. I want to listen to Sublime. I'm not saying I don't love and respect and appreciate Nirvana, but I may not want to have my ass, you know, dragged down that day. But I put on Sublime, you put on 40 ounces, I don't do it often, but when I do, I'm right back in that place where I need to be. And I don't know, that's maybe just a personal taste, but I think that is something that will indubitably stand the test of time.
It's interesting that you bring up Kurt Cobain and Jim Morrison and Tupac Shakur, because they're part of that infamous under 27 under club where they died before
yeah.
And of course Bradley
27,
Bradley died of course when he was 28. Do you think that, you know, and I try not to be disrespectful in any way when I say this, but do you think the fact that he died at 28 instead of 27, it almost hurts his legacy in respect? He's not part of that 27 club.
That could very well be the case. The tragedy with Brad is simply that he didn't mean to die. He was just celebrating again, like a lot of them do once they get clean, and then they don't realize that once they get clean, they can't do what they used to be able to do, which they probably took time building, you know, their stamina up to. And so, unfortunately, I have lost a lot of people like that, many of them not famous, and it fucking sucks. But when you talk to Brad's father and you hear the stories of pain and how he had to learn to stop crying himself to sleep at night because he knew he was going to lose his son, probably, you know, then you realize that, okay, maybe this is sort of a tragic inevitability of some artists who are strung out and can't seem to cope with the outside world without some sort of, you know, some sort of medication. And I'm only going to say this has nothing to do with Brad, but this is one of the horns that I like to toot. We do a really shitty fucking job here in America of addressing mental health issues. So people are forced to self-medicate themselves all the time. Sometimes they don't make great decisions, and sometimes we lose great people and friends and family and kind people along the way. And maybe if we did a better job of that, we wouldn't have so many losses. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, well, there seems to be a bit of a transformation now with both drug addiction and mental health. I mean, with mental health, we've come a very long way since, you know, the 50s of doing lobotomies, but I mean, we still have much further to go, and particularly with addiction as well.
Because you're either, if you fit in slot ABC, here's your prescription. And quite often, it shouldn't be here's your prescription. It's like, here's meditative techniques, here's thought-stopping techniques, you know, become a bird watcher. There's all kinds of things you can do to take some of the horror of modern living out of your, you know, purview all the time. But we just, you know.
Yeah, I mean, well, there definitely is.
We do lose a lot of people who are medicating with alcohol and drugs because that's just what they do.
Well, we obviously have much further to go, and it's funny that you brought up Kurt Cobain and Nirvana, because Although, and here I'm going to be revealing my age to you right now, but I was about 11 when Cobain died. So I was,
Okay.
and I wasn't I was just a little bit into Nirvana at the time, but I was a little bit too young.
You were a little grommy. You were a little grommy.
Yeah, but and I was going to say that just a few years later, I was listening to Sublime, and I will say honestly, Bradley, his death was probably the first one to ever really affect me. I remember where I was when I first heard it. How is his wife doing these days?
You know what? She was always so sweet, and I know she remarried, and I believe she has a family.
Wonderful.
And I know that her son only says lovely things about her, and that's about all I know. But it's I just I can't imagine how difficult it must be having somebody for a precious short period of time and then they're gone. And I can't imagine how difficult it must be for a son to grow up. But again, that son is growing up with the same roots of that incredibly epic family, and knowing his dad's brilliance and talent, and having that legacy to help support him as he delves into his own art.
I would imagine it's bittersweet for both of them, because they turn on the radio and you're going to hear a Sublime song at some point within a few hours.
Yes.
So you have this celebration of his life, but at the same time, I imagine it being bittersweet, a reminder of both the good and the bad at the same time.
Absolutely, and I do think what keeps a lot of people going in situations like that are the fans. I know that there's not a day when his dad doesn't enjoy hearing from fans, because it just helps keep the spirit alive. And Brad's spirit is alive and well. I did not even go into the number of crazy cosmic flow coincidences that happened during the process of writing that book. There were just so many interesting things. And so there are even, I feel it with Tupac's spirit too. I think it's because the music is so strong and so relevant today that you still kind of feel their spirit everywhere. And I think that, his dad having that connection with the fans, and his son knowing how valuable that music, still is, keeps him alive. So hearing the music on the radio is probably a great way to, keep somebody still very present in your daily life, It's nice when you can do that. And I think in Brad's case, I don't think it's a dark story or a sad story, because again, he died accidentally. It wasn't like he was dark and wanted that to happen. He was partying and lost his life, and that is not unusual. People, a lot of men, I think men in their 40s, I believe the top, killer is alcohol and prescription drugs. So sometimes, again, that lethal cocktail, I don't believe, was intended in any way. I think he was so happy. He had a baby. He had a wife.
Yeah, he just got married the week before.
Just played a killer show, Things were going well. Had his own place. I'm sure he would have loved to not gone out like that. But whatever it was that was in him that felt better doing that, just probably got the better of him at that point in time. But I'm sure he had every desire to wake up that next day,
Yeah, he had every reason to live, like you said. He had a son a year before. He just got married a week before. They were putting out a major label album shortly, which I'm sure he knew pretty fantastic, and I'm sure he knew. He probably he wanted to enjoy the fruits of his labor. Obviously, he made a mistake, and that's what happens a lot of times with people who use drugs. They make this mistake. It's not they were trying to do something, but sometimes things happen when you get mixed up in these things.
Yeah, I think that, we can go over and over and over since the beginning of time, but Jerry Garcia, Dee Dee Ramone, it's like nobody intended that to happen. Jerry had tried to be clean and was clean, and probably did what Bradley did, which was think he could take the same amount of drugs. And, Dee Dee Ramone, there's no way that would have been his intention. And I'm sure, I don't know, I try not to look at the news much, but I don't know what happened with Prince, but whatever it was, I don't believe it was his intention.
I was saying, and Bradley was, extremely self-aware person. He knew his issue with it, and he knew the problem with it.
Yes.
I remember.
Yes.
in the documentary Stories, Tales, Lies, and Exaggerations, and for any listener who hasn't seen that, if you really want to get the inside feel, besides Heidi's book, obviously, definitely view that. But I remember him comparing. I mean, he was so smart too that he was comparing characters from Hong Kong Phooey to ancient, to Greek myths and the heroes of them, and how each hero has their own tragic or their own Achilles heel. And I think, in a sense, he was also talking about himself there. He knew he was, he was a hero. He was great, musically talented, but he knew he had this Achilles heel.
Yes, that's right. That's right. I mean, I got. There's so many things that could have, maybe led up to it, and coulda, woulda, shoulda, and things from childhood, and all those things. But at the end of the day, it was just the misfortune of the cocktail that that we lost him to, and I'm just, again, I think of so many of the high points of this whole thing, and I got the most beautiful book report that a girl wrote about that book, and her mom called me before she bought the book. She wanted to make sure it was okay for her daughter to read it. And I told her some of the gnarly things that were in there, but I said that for the greater good, she's going to really appreciate a lot of it, because it's a very urban story. It's a very relevant story. It could be anyone's kid, And that book report was just so freaking great, because I just felt like, again, all of these... Thank you. Hey, Hank, sorry about that.
No problem.
Barking. Anyway, just talked about how touching it was, and how she thinks it'll inspire a generation not to do drugs. So I hope she's right.
And I'm sure that's one of the big things that you wanted the readers to take away from it. And since we do have that barking dog in the background, and when you think of Sublime, how can you not, of course, think of L.A.W, the Dalmatian?
I know, and everybody thinks Lou's so cute, and I'm sure he was, but God, the stories about Louis were so nasty. The little rascal. My favorite story was that you weren't supposed to bring these dogs on the work tour, no dogs on the work tour. Well, of course, that didn't fly for the Sublime crew, but I love the fact that L.A.W hated, purportedly, allegedly, skateboarders. And so he was just, everybody skateboards on the work tour, so L.A.W was always like chasing him, fighting him, wreaking havoc, and I think that is just so perfectly Sublime.
And how were L.A.W's remaining years? I believe he lived for a few more years after that, right? After Bradley's death.
Oh, I think that I want to say Miguel is the person to ask on that. Because for some reason, I think Miguel may have actually inherited that dog. I could be wrong, but somebody kept him, and I think he continued to be bad to the bone up until his final days.
Well, I wouldn't hope for anything else but that, quite frankly.
Yeah, exactly, right?
And I hope he's chomping on a few bones himself. And I know we only have a few minutes left. And what do you think someone should take away from the story, from Brad's story? I mean, obviously he's a great musician. But, what are the lessons that we need to learn from his tragic death?
Oh, wow. Well, I think in evaluating anything, you want to think, in your own mind, how you want to live and how you want to be. But, I just feel like we're in a transitional time between the Beach Boys and Sublime, and the Beach Boys' innocence of, Southern California, and the innocence of America, really, because it was kind of an American innocence, even though it wasn't true. And if you know the real story of the Beach Boys, it's behind it. But Brad kind of wore reality on his sleeve. He gave you that music that is so dreamy and SoCal and palm trees and oceans, but he told you how people were living, and he gave you what was real. And I think that there's no doubt in my mind that hip-hop and rap and pure punk had a lot to do with that. So I think the thing to take away is to keep it real always. Brad always did, and that's why he's loved so much, because he kept it real in his music, he kept it real in life, and I do think that's why, his legacy is going to continue to blossom. And I think his son will play a big part in that because his son is keeping it real as well.
Very well said. And let's end off on a high note. Was there any charities that you would recommend donating to in honor of Bradley?
I would pose that question to Papa Nowell and Kelly, because I think that there still is a trust that's set up for Jake that might be good, because every fatherless child can always use some ducats. But I will also say that, why not just get involved in donating to any local, dog charities? As somebody who loves his dog so much, why not make sure that your local SPCA has a no-kill shelter and help finance that so these dogs do not have to meet their maker prematurely? If there's something that I would do. Oh, you know what, actually, and there's one other thing, and I think this might even be better than that. I have had musician friends repeatedly helped through Music Cares. And so, for example, if you're strung out and you're a musician and you're willing to go get help, Music Cares will pick up 100% of your rehab bill. And I actually helped get somebody a 24-hour grant overnight so they could go get sober in a very, very important band. And I'm not going to say who, even though he wouldn't mind me saying who, because he's proud of his sobriety. But he's it's a very, very important band on the Southern California punk metal scene. And that's because Music Cares had $7,000 in its coffers at that time to come up with a grant overnight for him to go get clean. So Music Cares, if I were to say what would you want to do for Brad's legacy, I'd say give to Music Cares so other musicians can get sober on someone else's dime and not have to worry about the cost of that.
And that's a great recommendation, and we'll put up those links up on our sites as well. Give out your social media information before we let you go.
I think the only thing that's relevant is Foxy Cuda. Foxy Cuda, I was an investigative producer at Fox for a long time, so I had a nickname, Foxy Cuda, and I stuck with that on Twitter. So I just tweet. I'm a writer. I like to spin yarn, so I tweet.
Excellent, and we'll have those links up as well. Heidi, we need more people like you keeping it real, just like Bradley and yourself. I really appreciate giving the Mind's Eye a slice of your time.
I am so grateful that you asked me to, and aloha. We look forward to seeing you in Southern California.
Mind's Eye show wrap up in a matter of moments. One thing that I've always said to my friends over the past couple decades is that when I die, I know I made it to heaven when I wake up to the sound of Bradley playing music to me. But I guess in the meantime, I hope he's smiling down on us and having no quarrels with God. Again, big thank you to our guest tonight, the illustrious Heidi Siegmund Cuda and Todd Z-Man Zalkins. Appreciate giving us a few moments to swap some old war Sublime stories. More info on both guests at our website, themindseyemedia.com. One more time at you, themindseyemedia.com. And while you're on themindseyemedia.com, don't forget to check out our next episode. Another quick turnaround 2 days from today, Thursday, May 26th, 8 p.m. Eastern. The one and only Stanton T. Friedman, retired nuclear physicist, ufologist, and the original civilian investigator of Roswell. He's going to help send us off to our annual summer break. We'll discuss a variety of topics, including deep space travel and his upcoming presentation at Contact in the Desert 2016, which, if you don't know by now, is the largest UFO conference in the U.S. and one of the best in the world. The Mind's Eye will be in attendance and doing a little press work. We'll be attending the conference all weekend at the beautiful Joshua Tree, California, location of one of the most famous UFO sightings. Get more info about the conference at contactinthedesert.com. That's contactinthedesert.com. And Stanton and I will tell you more about it on Thursday. Join me then. Tip of the hat to you, the listener. I'm Brian Turnoff, signing off for the Mind's Eye.